Ruben Schwartz here from Sales for Nerds, kicking off the Sales for Nerds podcast. If you feel more comfortable with SQL than sales calls, more at home writing test suites than proposals, more interested in crunching numbers than shaking hands, if you think networking should be about routers rather than cocktails with strangers, if you're more interested in debating code editors than negotiating deals, but somehow you ended up responsible for some of those sales and marketing activities, this is the podcast for you. All right, today I'm super excited to welcome Ben Seigel of Versa Studios. He has been doing web development for 15 years, including the project management, the design, the business strategy, and the actual development. He runs the Madison Web Design and Development Meetup and volunteers every year with Junior Achievement. In his spare time, he enjoys bicycling, music, travel, spirited conversation, which we hope to get to a little bit today, and pretending to do parkour, which caught my attention and we'll definitely come back to. Now, one of the things that excited me about Ben when he came on the podcast, he said, "I like Moscato." And I said, "What's that?" So Ben, welcome, and tell us a little bit about what you've got in your glass.
Well, thank you. So what I've got in my glass is boring, and that's water at the moment. But Moscato is the favorite. It's a sweet white dessert wine, and I like the sweet stuff.
How are you not having proper beverage for this spirited conversation?
Oh, it's tough. I'm on one of those horrible diets that just talking about the diet makes people's eyes glaze over and makes them want to leave. So I won't even say.
At risk of making everyone leave and turn off the show, as I pour some Moscato, and it does certainly smell like a dessert wine, what is going on with your diet?
Oh, it's kind of, even the word paleo makes me cringe. It's kind of a paleo thing with some limitations. So water's better for hydrating during a chat anyway. But okay. I won't hold it against you that you've actually decided to drink some Moscato because it is good stuff.
You know, when it's 100 degrees in Texas, I can see how this kind of goes down nicely. And one thing I noticed, in addition to it being sweet and a little bit bubbly, not champagne bubbly, it's only 5% alcohol. So it's almost like drinking a sweet beer, if you will.
Yeah.
So, Ben, tell me a little bit about how you got started. You didn't just arrive in this world and start your career running a web design company.
No, back in the late 90s, I was running a lawn service, and I got not my first computer, but kind of my first computer as an adult. And I got it to do my books and to get online, and gradually started fiddling with HTML and web design and got really into it. I liked the fact that whatever I typed, whatever I created could turn into something useful on the screen and then be seen by anyone I could get to come see it. So I'm mostly self-taught, and I just kind of dug into it. I've stayed up many nights cursing at the screen, trying to get things to work. And now I just curse at the screen during the day.
Well, that's progress, I guess. How did you get into a lawn service business? I mean, that's also something that you don't typically hear somebody as their first step. Well, I had a lawn service business, and then I needed a computer, and it went from there.
Well, like many middle-class kids, I went to college with some idea of what I wanted to do, but I was unfocused and wasn't real happy with the curriculum and dropped out. And I waited tables, did some service jobs. And then I asked myself one day, well, what do I know how to do that I can get into quickly and make some money? And I'd mowed lawns as a kid, so I bought a lawnmower stuck in the back of my ancient Toyota Corolla hatchback and just started flyering the neighborhood like I'd done when I was a kid, and gradually developed it into a small business.
And did you ever go back to college?
I did. Eventually, I went back and got a degree in communications.
So you actually got closer than I did. I told my dad when I was getting close to graduating that I was never going to amount to anything in the computer industry because I was planning to get my degree. And you had a chance to really make it great, but you decided to go back and get your degree anyway, I guess.
Right.
So when you started doing this HTML stuff, when did you decide, hey, this is something that maybe I would rather do than mow lawns all day?
I think I'd been kind of a computer nerd as a kid and always enjoyed it. But at one point, the computers I wanted just were too expensive, and my kind of interest shifted. But then getting into it as an adult, I had this mistaken idea that you needed to be really good at math to program. But once I started doing website design, I realized that I could kind of connect all my various talents. Now, I can't draw to save my life, but I can do things in Photoshop. So I was able to kind of put all those interests together and then realize that, hey, this is actually a career for people.
And so how did you start in your career with these talents and with these skills?
I started a legal publishing company that's changed their names about 6 times. I think they're called Thomson Reuters now. We were part of a new department making websites for law firms. And that was fun for a while, but eventually you come to see that almost every single website you'll ever do for a law firm is exactly the same. You can change the colors and the fonts and the photos, but they don't vary much. Lawyers aren't, for good reason, they're not really about cutting edge or taking risks. So that department kind of bloomed off of the graphic design and interactive folks as people started to see that the internet was important. And we were just kind of brought in through a bunch of, like a team of people in their early to late 20s, just kind of learning as we went. And it was a lot of fun.
And then how did you decide at some point, hey, I would rather do this on my own than as part of a big company?
Well, I think like a lot of people in my field, you start by working for someone and you learn a lot there, but eventually you might see like, hey, I have enough skills to kind of hang out a shingle and do this myself. And because all you really need in this profession to make a go of it, of course, besides the intangible things like hard work and good luck and so forth and skill, is just a decent computer and an internet connection, and you can work. So it's not like construction where you need a whole bunch of tools, or even home remodeling or some profession where you need to have a whole bunch of stuff.
Right.
It's also one where you don't need professional certifications. Now, we see this with the results of some websites where anybody and their brother can grab WordPress and say, I'm a web designer, and make something that, it's a website. It's not very good, but it's there. I guess I could shorten that by saying just the low barrier to entry is very attractive.
Sure. And then when you started doing your own thing, how did you handle the actual sales and marketing of your own business versus sort of the performing the executing the task of creating the websites that you were already good at?
Well, early on, it was that period where things were shifting from what had been very traditional advertising and media-wise, so print and TV and radio. So I remember running small print ads, and maybe from time to time talking to business owners. And for almost everyone, the web was new. So if you talk to someone and said, "Hey, we're starting to build these websites. Have you heard about this?" Some people had, some hadn't, but it was kind of on the radar. So that combination of print ads and talking to people and referrals kind of got me going early on.
And so when people would talk to you, some of them I assume would be excited and wanted a website. Some of them probably had no idea what you were talking about. How did you kind of figure out who do I want to spend time talking to?
Well, you try to gauge how familiar they were with the web and maybe ask them how they use the web. You could point to their competitors who are online, or even just any business they might recognize and say, oh, hey, there's this business, they're down the block. Here's their website. Go look at that. And once people started to get on the clue train, so to speak, understand the value of having a website, it became a little easier to kind of sell them. It's kind of a matter of growing awareness. And that was in some ways a very good time to be getting into this field, because although you had to persuade people of different things, you might have also been the first or second person to talk to them about it, versus now where they can Google web designer and get 10,000 hits.
Right. So you stood out just by the fact that you knew what this whole World Wide Web thing was and you could help them.
Yeah. I guess you could say people doing this early on, or early adopters, had knowledge that others didn't. And as we see from so many industries that have been decimated or changed, or just really seen their business model shift, well, almost everything, music, print media, and so on. If you knew this stuff early and you had some sense of where it was going and the importance of it, you could try to impart that to people. And if you could get them early, you'd be the one who came to them with that kind of special knowledge before anyone else.
Right. And at that time, was it important to be dealing with people who were local that you could sit down with, or were you doing stuff all over the place even then?
Definitely. I think at that point, early on, all my business was local, partly because you didn't have things like GoToMeeting, conferencing. Right. Because the concept was so new, you couldn't jump online with someone and show them things. It was pretty much, I'll meet you at your business, or we'll meet somewhere and I'll actually show you what's going on. So local was definitely important at that point.
So when you're talking with these folks, and some of them seem like they're interested, they've caught the clue train, if you will, and they say, yes, I want to do this. Did you have some sort of standard way of saying, okay, here's my proposal? Or how did you figure out your process for actually going from, hey, here's someone who's interested, to here's someone who's a paying customer?
I didn't have a process. Early on, it was a complete and utter mess. I mean, I had contracts of some kind, but, and this holds true today as it did when we started in this business, is you can define something in as many words as you want, but if there isn't a clear of understanding what that thing is, then I like to say, as an example, image library. So an image library could be 50 images with some tags and maybe a description for each, or it could be 10,000 images that you can share and upload and resize, and you need sorting and quick search and all this other stuff.
Right.
Two people both would call that an image library, but one might take a couple hours to do, and one might take a week to build.
Right.
So it's very important to clarify just what a thing is. Early on, I would just kind of define what the pages were in the site, and the structure, a little bit about the features. But I left out a whole bunch of things, and these were smaller projects early on. You also had some wiggle room. You'd make something and it didn't work on the Mac, and at that point we'd say, well, we never talked about that, or nobody has a Mac. You can get away with it. And now you can't do that so much.
And how did you grow your practice and sort of as you went along, what were you able to systematize and what was stubbornly resistant to systematization?
Well, I want to say the tools, a lot of the tools that we use, from a CRM, a contact resource manager, basically a database of all your contacts, your customers, and your leads, through to the CMS or content management system, the Adobe Creative Suite. All these tools we use have gotten really good. Mm-hmm. They still don't interoperate that well, and there's still times where I like, you can do the Tim Ferriss thing and be constantly optimizing and always trying to find some new tool to save yourself 10 seconds a day. Or you can say, well, this is a little cumbersome, but I don't want to spend hours and hours researching something that will save me an hour or two, or for little edge cases. As far as systematizing, I guess that's happening in a lot of places. Contracts are one thing. So, and I know that is your business, making contract writing or proposal creating easier. From our end, I've developed over years kind of a standard set of feature descriptions and some very standard language for a whole bunch of the parts of a website, from what they're going to get for initial mockups and designs, to what they get when they want us to brand them, all the way through to feature description. And then in terms of the terms, every time I have a bad experience with a client, whether it's their fault or mine or just something we didn't foresee, right, another line or paragraph gets added to my contract. So it's a Frankenstein monster, but it's grown a lot over the years. You run into something you never anticipated, and you say, well, I know that's going to come up again, so I'm going to add this in.
And when you sit down these days, how much of your time is spent building websites versus doing the sales and marketing versus managing other people?
I want to say it's split maybe 40%, sales and managing everything, and 40% working, and then 20% managing and directing other people. I don't know that any designer will say this directly to their client, although if their client is in a service profession where they have similar challenges or similar work issues, they would get it. And that's that when someone needs me to do something that takes me 5 minutes or 20 minutes, and I bill for an hour, or I just, I bill something like $400 or $500. Note to clients, I didn't just say that, but something that the actual time doing the thing is very brief. Mm-hmm. I'm not billing for the actual time. I'm billing for all the BS and all the interruptions, as well as all the knowledge that it's taken to accumulate to get to the point where I can do that thing in 20 minutes.
Right.
And so a lot of us spend time just, unfortunately, with that constant partial attention, putting out fires, responding to this email, asking for things that should have been delivered the first time, and that's what can eat up a lot of time in any business, especially in a service one where you're constantly needing assets and approval and direction on a project. I haven't found a way around it yet.
I haven't found a great way around it either, though I notice sort of the clients that I enjoy working for, where things get done and delivered on time, and where people can kind of batch things up for me, versus folks who need 6 reminders to get the thing that I need to help them. And then, that there's no batching, but like sporadically, there's almost like there's a random number generator throwing out, should I throw an urgent issue over the wall right now? And you're right, that leads to very different, I look back at what does each client get in terms of their value for the money. The one who can be really efficient with me is going to get better value.
Certainly. A lot of the challenges I find in our business these days, they're really more people problems than technology problems. We know that, within reason, if someone asks us to do technologically what NASA does, we're going to say, sorry, we can't do that. But if they need something really complex and customized that takes 1,000 hours of development, we can build it. It's dealing with people in all their imperfections and confusions and commonalities. When I'm dealing with a difficult client or something comes up, I try to remind myself of the times when I'm that client. Like when I deal with service professionals in my home, if it's a new furnace, I've had tree trimmers over because the recent storm tore a limb down, and you've got this rotting tree leaning towards your house, and you think like, I want to spend thousands of dollars, but I need to take care of this. So I kind of become the idiot, right? Standing there, asking dumb questions, or, can you get me to the point? Can you get me to the point? Well, no, I actually need to take a really good look at this, and I need to see how rotted it is, and then, waiting for an estimate. And I become that person who, because I almost never deal with these folks, I'm just kind of not real bright about it. Whereas if you have an interaction with people more frequently, or they have more experience working in the area that you do, they're better at those things like batching tasks and knowing what's important and having a little stronger, not so much tech savvy, but at least general internet savvy in terms of how they interact with you and what they work with.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, I have the same experience when people come to help me with something around the house that I don't know how to deal with. And I think I notice people who are good at sort of translating their expertise into layman's terms, and then people who, they're so in their own world, they have trouble communicating with a layman. And obviously there's a lot more friction in that case. So I think, one of the notes you had from your book on website planning is that the intake process is really all about the business owner. It's not your chance to talk about how smart you are and how you know all these great technologies. It's about helping them figure out their needs and what does that really mean. And I like that you said, hey, take good notes and keep following the threads and tangents if they're leading to useful information. And don't feel like you have to describe the solution right away, right? Let them describe what their real problem is so you can then develop the appropriate solution.
Yeah, and it's remarkable just what can come up in these sessions, whether it's whatever you want to call it, a strategy session or planning session. Businesses whether they have just 5 employees or 50 or 100, there's a lot of institutional knowledge there. There's a lot of stuff that can be hidden. There are a lot of things that people, they don't know they know because they've been working in this for so long. But when you really dig deep, you find out, you can find huge inefficiencies. You can find that they're spending a bunch of money on tech that nobody likes or understands anymore. A whole bunch of stuff comes up. But it can be very hard conveying why it's so important to do this kind of planning, because they don't understand that knowledge is there and buried, but also really useful. And sometimes the results of doing this kind of planning can be not what you expect. Someone might be looking at dropping 50 grand on a project, and after you do some really thorough discovery and planning, you realize that that's not the best place to put your money. Like, you shouldn't hire us to do that. Maybe you want to hire us to do something else, or maybe we go in a different direction. But this project you had planned, it's not going to give you a good return on investment, so don't do it. And I think really savvy business owners love that kind of advice, because then they realize that you really are there for them and not just there to make a buck or to sell them on whatever it is your solution is. But it can be very hard to get to that point with people because we're all a little bit skeptical around a salesperson's claim that they're really just there to help you, because you're thinking they're really just there to make money. But once you show at least some folks the value of uncovering this information and having it lead wherever it leads, you gain a lot of trust that way, because then you really are showing that you're trying to help their business and not just maximize your profits.
Right, and I think it's oftentimes it's hard to know, especially if you're the idiot in the situation. You don't even know what you're supposed to know about this whole concept, and you're naturally mistrustful because of the knowledge imbalance. And I always sort of take this back to the doctor analogy because my wife's a doctor, but doctors are salespeople too. They're convincing people to change and to do things medically that are very hard, or to undergo surgery or what have you. And obviously if they came across like a salesperson, that's not going to go very well. And most people, when you walk into the doctor, you don't think you're talking to a salesperson, and you're much more receptive to advice and to questions and so on than when you're in a quote unquote sales situation, even though they're really kind of the same thing, except that the stakes are much higher in the doctor's office.
Agreed.
Now let's talk a little bit about this planning topic, because you do have a whole ebook on this, and I'll put a link in the show notes so that people can grab it. And I think I come across so many people. I don't do web design myself, but obviously the website is an important, my customer's website is an important part of whether my stuff is going to be effective. And so there's a lot of conversations about web design. And I feel like a lot of people, it's almost like they're still in 1999 and they say, well, I need a website and it might need some shiny things on it, but I don't really understand what it's supposed to do. And so they spend a bunch of money on the site, on AdWords, on all these things that aren't actually driving their business forward. And it kind of goes to what you were talking about. Like maybe if they had done a little planning at the beginning about what they really needed to do, and maybe if they had interacted with you instead of whoever sold them the shiny bauble of a website, they would actually have something that drives their business versus something that they are now trying to replace, but they're burned and they don't want to actually spend the money and so on and so forth. It's kind of a vicious cycle.
Yeah, we see that a lot. Part of the issue is that when you spend a lot of money on something, it's not just a financial investment, but an emotional investment has been made. And it's like you see this with teenagers and folks in their early 20s. They want this car. They just want the car so bad. And you look at a car and you think it's either a piece of junk or it gets 9 miles a gallon or maybe both. But maybe it's really shiny on the outside. And they want this car so bad. And you want to say, look, man, it's a really cool car, but all this is going to do is burn you. And you can tell them that. And if they've already bought the car, well, it's not a real good time to tell them. But it's really hard to cut your losses and say, okay, yeah, our company spent 20 grand on a website that doesn't really make sense to anyone. Well, now we need to spend another 30 to do one that will actually be effective. But if that's what you need to do, it's just that nobody likes to hear that advice. So it's tough. It's tough love advice. It really is.
People can talk about sunk cost all the time, but it kind of goes against human psychology.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think any of us can think of a time where we put money into something and then someone comes along and says, yeah, you got to put more. But what? Oh, no, I can't. No, I can't. And you dig in. You just don't want to. I'm going to make this thing work no matter what because I've put money and time into it.
Right. And it's often even worse than, hey, you got to invest more to get more. It's like you've screwed up so badly. You have to spend more than you originally planned just to dig yourself out of the hole. And
right.
Like you say, that's not just a financial hit. It's an ego and an emotional hit.
Yeah, I think another barrier is planning's not very sexy. People don't, I can't wait to have 5 planning meetings. I can't wait to dig through everything that our company does and bring in all of these employees and just sit there and hash over it. It's not as fun as like, show us the new design. Let's see a new logo. Like I heard about this thing called parallax scrolling or some whiz-bang technology that they heard about. It's just planning is hard work. Sometimes it's kind of boring or tedious, but it's the thing that you do. And when you do it really thoroughly and well, now you have a project plan. Like now you have something to work off of that actually reflects the needs you've identified as opposed to just what some random person might think you ought to do. Right.
Yeah. The things like parallax scrolling and other random stuff that actually makes the site in many cases less useful and less valuable. But somebody heard something about it or their kid told them something and they just have to have it. And
yeah, there's an awful lot of cookie cutter sites up right now based off of themes and often off of WordPress. And I'm not saying you can never make a good site with a theme or with WordPress, but we just see a whole lot of stuff where it's like paint by numbers. It's they're all the same. They all kind of have the same look, and they have a lot of really generic copy about optimizing and maximizing this and that. And you look over and you just think, like, what is it that you guys do, and why should I care? And can you get me to the point? I don't care that you have a beautiful photo of a panoramic park with happy millennials on their phones. Like, so what? That's great. You have Instagram. You have Photoshop filters. What are you selling? Why should I care? And a lot of companies, I think, fail to answer that question in their pursuit of, we love this theme. Like if I ever have a conversation or a conversation starts with a client or their request starts with, we want a website and we want this theme, I can sense it's already going downhill because they are addressing the very least important point of the whole process to say, we want this theme. Like, okay, but hold on, wait a minute. What does your company do? Who are your customers? Who's your competition? Those are all the kinds of questions you'd ask before you ever get into anything to do with theming.
Now, I'm guessing that the folks who come to you with a theme in mind are not doing that because they've already done all the preparatory work and they've reached that stage and it's appropriate for them to be there.
Correct. Usually it's people thinking about, I don't know if you use like a like a home analogy, someone's really wants this sparkling kitchen, and they want to talk all about the tile and the backsplash and all this stuff because they're really into cooking. And meanwhile, the contractor wants to talk about the foundation.
Right.
And how are you going to power the house, and do you have the right permits? But someone wants to jump right to the kitchen. Like, well, okay, you get your kitchen, but you need a house to surround it first.
Right.
I use the home and car metaphor a lot with folks because most folks can relate to it. One of the challenges we have in businesses that basically offer consulting and services is that they're not tangible. Mm-hmm. So often people, they don't see the work process. Sometimes they don't see some of the results because code that works just works and you're not reading it to see how it was written. Compare that to a house or a car. Everybody knows how they work. Everybody knows the parts of them. And so when you relate things back to that, they can say, oh, yeah, I guess it would be good to know how many bedrooms we want before we build. Yeah, I can dig that. Okay.
Right. Do we have to worry about snow or not?
Right.
That's a great point. I think the whole notion of making it relatable is important when there's often a gap in sort of the knowledge or understanding of the domain between somebody who's doing something, whether it's building a website or redoing a kitchen, and whoever actually wants to enjoy the end results. And it's one thing if people say, I have an unlimited budget, here's what I need, go do your thing. But most people aren't in that position. So in order to make the right trade-offs for them, we have to kind of know, well, what are you actually trying to do? And I think that's another important part of your website guide, right? You say, well, what is the purpose of your website?
Right. What do you want it to do? I mean, most folks will say sales. They want it to increase sales. But that's not always the answer. Sometimes people want it to be a much better informational tool. Maybe they want it to cut down on phone calls they're getting constantly, people asking them common questions where they'd rather drive people to the web. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they have really deep informational needs. There are lots of businesses where you have a whole bunch of kind of related types of data. I know that's kind of vague. I don't want to sell my own projects here, but let's just say you have an event. Mm-hmm. And the event has 100 sub-events in it. Well, who's presenting at those events, and what's the limit on the seating, and where are they, and do you have a map? And how long does it take people to get from event A to event B to event D, and so on? What are the interest groups around these events? Pretty soon, you're answering 100 questions before you can even come up with a model for the data. And after you model the data, then you have to connect it to a web interface that a non-technical person can use, so that at the very end of all this, you go online, it's like schedule my day.
Right.
And you pick the things you're interested in, you make a little favorites list, and there's your schedule. That's quite an involved process, and it can't really be shortcut if you want a good result.
But people think, oh, it's really simple. I just want to pick from a bunch of things, make it easy. That's not hard, is it?
Right. Well, yeah, if you're picking from 5 things, right, then it's easy. If you're picking from 100 over 3 days, and you can brainstorm all kinds of other limitations, like, well, people have different levels of passes, and there's pass level gold and platinum and silver, and the gold people can get into these events and so on. And it rapidly becomes, you realize it's actually rather complex. And the problem can be solved, but you have to understand what the problem is first before you can solve it.
That would seem to make sense. And I think everyone sort of smiles and nods when they hear that. And then we can all look back on situations in our own lives when we realize we've kind of got the wrong way up the creek and forgot our paddle because we lost track of what we were really trying to do.
Yeah, and I want to say, like, beyond just project planning for websites or other things, one of my favorite things to ask someone if I'm dealing with an issue, whether it's personal or business, it doesn't really matter. Although I think this is, well, I guess you could apply this to anything. It's like you could say, what are the questions I'm not asking? Or is there something I'm not seeing here? That's really good for relationships because it's always you and the other person or other people, and you're just in your own world. And if you have a third party come along and say, well, have you thought about this? Well, no, I haven't. Well, what about these things? And in business and project planning, or if you're building your house or whatever you're doing, if someone can come along and really kind of, I like to call it like interrogating the problem, like, mm-hmm. or playing devil's advocate. Well, here's some other things that you should consider, or what about this? And having that outside perspective, someone to really challenge you on what you think you know about the process, can save you a whole lot of headache or heartache, respectively, just because Like you can't be your own therapist. You can't be your own business counselor, business coach. You need someone outside to ask you those things.
Okay, that makes sense. And in some cases, I think every once in a while you can even ask the client, well, what am I not asking you that I'm supposed to be asking you? And something will bubble up that maybe no one was really ready to talk about, but lo and behold, it's actually really important that you keep in mind that, the page also has to be in Chinese or whatever.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, certainly. Certainly. And doing that repeatedly, really continuing to dig. Maybe it doesn't come out on the first meeting. Or maybe someone is out of the office and when they come back in, you should really talk to Stan. He's been here 30 years and he knows stuff that the rest of us don't know. And, you get Stan in a room and you talk with him and you find out a whole bunch of other things that are really important to the project success.
Yeah, I got burned a number of times when I would work even with small companies. I thought, oh gosh, I used to spend all my time with giant companies and it was always hard figuring out who knew what. And I started working with smaller companies and that was really fun. And I would talk to these owners and sometimes it was great. You could go in and in no time at all, you could completely change the direction of their business. In other cases, the owner would say, we never need to worry about Chinese or whatever the situation is. And they were very emphatic and very smart people who loved their business and they were deep into it. And I just took them at their word and we would go do something. And then a month later, someone on the team would say, of course we have to worry about Chinese or whatever the thing that was categorically not designed in was, just because there are all these little intricacies that don't necessarily bubble up to the owner, even in a small business, but are still important to the actual functioning of the business.
Yeah, it's hard to know all those things. Businesses are complex and you have people who are specialists in their domain within the business, and in small businesses, sometimes that's just one single person who's been there a long time, and they know stuff that the others don't know.
And if they happen to be on vacation when you have those initial meetings, the whole direction can get set without their input, and you never know.
Yeah, that can happen, can and does.
And I used to get frustrated. Oh, we're not really ready to meet with you yet. So-and-so's on vacation. And now I realize, okay, good. At least they know that so-and-so knows a bunch of stuff that's important. Let's wait for them to come back from vacation so that if it does make sense to work together, we're all on the same page.
Right, yeah, they know where their knowledge is.
Now, just a quick shout out to Eric Bison, who writes on iTunes, highly recommend. I love all the actionable and valuable information that Ruben and his guests bring in this show. If you are looking to get better at sales and marketing, I highly recommend listening. Thanks a lot, Eric. And if you'd like to leave a review, please do so. It helps out. Now, another one of the things that you try to do, my understanding is for websites, is to keep things as simple as possible, which I think is another one of those things that everyone would say, yeah, smile and nod, of course, motherhood, apple pie, keep it simple. Can you give some examples of how that actually plays out and where people have to make trade-offs? Because everyone's going to say, yeah, of course we want to keep it simple. They just end up making it complicated accidentally.
Sure. So first we take a restaurant, for example. There are three things that people want to find out when they're looking at a restaurant to eat: the hours, the menu, and the location. And there's probably some other stuff, but those are the key things.
Okay.
And so you put up a clear menu, not a PDF, not a PowerPoint, not a Word doc, not a TIFF, like any random format that our designer exported this way. Yeah, no one can read an Adobe Illustrator file on their iPhone, okay? And people actually do this. You put up your menu responsively, you make it work properly across devices, the site loads fast, and then you've got the hours and location, a phone number to call, really clear, basic stuff. That's what people want when they're looking at a restaurant. They don't want extra stuff. I mean, down the bottom, yeah, if you want to let them share and like and favorite and post it to everything under the sun, that's fine. But they're not there to share it. They're there to find out if they want to eat at your restaurant. Another good example would be take your plumbing supply business. So it's kind of a warehouse full of parts and 2 or 3 guys getting their hands dirty at the front, and contractors come in all day long in trucks and pick up parts. They do a lot of work over the phone. Hey, Bob, do you have this part? It's mostly men. It's blue collar. It's a business where you get your hands dirty, and that's how they interact. And so a website could be useful to them, but they probably don't need to be messing around on Twitter or Instagram. But the boss may come to you and say, oh, I've heard from my nephew that we got to have a Twitter account and Instagram is the hottest thing, and we want to really leverage this for our business. You want to say, I don't think the people you sell to are on Instagram looking at parts, at sinks and washers and toilets. It's just not, it doesn't align. So you can do it if you want, but it's just not a good use of your time and money. That's not where your audience is. But having a website that loads really quickly on the mobile phones for all these contractors that are out in the field. They need to look up a part, find out what something costs, see if it's available. That would be great. So that's going to be priority one for them. Like, show me the stuff I want to find quickly and have it load up so I can get on with my day.
Make it really easy to click this link and have it actually call from the phone.
Yeah, exactly.
I made so many mistakes like this when I was going through different phases of my consulting website, and I still see it all the time. And of course, it's much easier to recognize when someone else is doing it than when you're doing it. But I thought, I need to have this form that's got their first name, their last name, their title, their company, their phone number, their social security number, and favorite Beatle, and so on, so that I can triage the vast deluge of leads that's sure to come in. And really, I was doing the stuff you're talking about, right? Just scaring people away and making people not want to take that next step, as opposed to making it really easy for people. Like, hey, how about you just give me your email and I'll send you the thing you asked for?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I see from time to time some really good examples of that. Gumroad is one. Gumroad, it's not really a shopping cart system exactly, but it lets you sell things online. It works for physical and digital products. So if you have a PDF ebook, that's what I'm using to sell mine. The nice thing about Gumroad is both for the person doing the selling who's setting it up, it's really easy and user-friendly. It's also really low friction for the person buying. You click a button, a window pops up, and it literally asks for your credit card number, and I think the expiration date and the 3-digit code, and your email. Mm-hmm. And you can request more, but that's all that's required to make the transaction. And that's really low friction. That's like, oh, this is all they need, and you fill it out, and boom, there's your book, or there's your package is on the way, as opposed to the usual checkout and cart process where you have to give them 30 pieces of information, and their validation doesn't work. So they'll say, for example, enter a password here, and so you enter in something, and it says, sorry, password has to have a combination of 15 digits and numbers, and you're going around and around and around. Meanwhile, you're losing interest in spending money with them because this is so painful. So really reducing that friction and just giving people an easy way to do what they wanted to do in the first place is a great idea.
I think one of the nice things about the web is you can make an approximation of what someone's trying to do based on what page they're on. So if they're on the menu page for your restaurant, they want to know what you serve, right? You don't have to give them anything other than what's on your menu. If it's some kind of more complicated B2B site, if they're on a page about, how to install the flux capacitor, talk about how to install the flux capacitor. Don't have a million other things there, or don't have content that doesn't actually relate to that, because if they went to that page, that's what they're looking for. And I think a lot of times people say, okay, well, I know they might have come here for that, but now I'm going to try to sell them a whole bunch of other stuff that I care about, even though that's really not what someone would come to this page for by definition.
Right. It's easy to distract the site visitor with a whole bunch of other things that you think are really important. But really, the thing that they came to, if the page is well designed and they're installing that flux capacitor, that's the only thing that they're going to want to see.
And I don't know, are you familiar with the site Daring Fireball?
I haven't seen it.
This is literally a guy who writes about technology, mostly Apple stuff. He's got this really simple two-tone website. It's like white on gray. And I think he has one ad in the sidebar that's a static ad, and then he has a weekly sponsor that he writes a post about each week. And you're talking about these newspapers and how sort of traditional media sites are trying to claw back money by bogging down their sites with all this crap that people don't care about and they want to block. And there's this guy who is writing about stuff that people care about in that audience, and then his ads are targeted to people in that audience. And the sponsorships, he's got a little blurb about why this company is great and why you should care about them, so people actually want to read it. And obviously that's not necessarily going to work for a mass media company, but I think it's an interesting take on how you can actually be very profitable in the media business if you deliver content that people care about and deliver ads in a way that's tasteful and actually ads that people are going to care about.
Yeah, and that makes me wonder. I think the challenges of New York Times and Washington Post and any other reputable, longstanding media property, I think that that's a really hard problem to solve, because we're used to getting so much content for supposedly for free, even though it's subsidized or monetized somehow. A lot of them they continue to have really good reporting, but it's all the other stuff around the margins and all the clutter. I still, to this day, I don't know how much longer they'll publish the print edition, but I really enjoy reading the print edition of the New York Times because it's just, even if the headlines are the same, the content is the same, nothing moves,
Right.
nothing tries to get my attention. The font size is good. It's just a better overall experience. And I think it's not just because it's print and I can hold it in my hand and it's easier than staring at a light source. It's just a better experience of consuming the media overall. But they're facing some real challenges because we've all been kind of conditioned to expect that, like, somehow all this, they have bureaus all over the world and paying their reporters good money to report on important things. We just think that somehow it should just come to us for free. So they're facing some really serious challenges. And unfortunately for us readers, there's just, the sites have gotten really, really cluttered. Even some of the best media will have those clickbait links at the bottom, like how to fix crepey skin or what the Kardashians are doing this week. And it's really kind of troubling, because I even emailed Washington Post about this, and I said, I'd like to buy a subscription, but when I do, does it get rid of the ads? And they said, no, not really. Just gives you access to all the articles. Well, can I pay more to not see any ads?
Right.
Or just to have ads that aren't the crepey skin or the random stuff that I don't care about? I don't know if they're there yet.
Well, it's funny because that same thing really bothers me. And I have to feel like, at first I wanted to blame the media companies. And I think the problem is us, because I have to imagine that thanks to it all being online, they have the analytics that says this is what people really click on.
Yes, the
right?
crepey skin. Yes.
And enough about the stuff about, the economy and climate change and some tragedy somewhere. Like, what are the Kardashians up to now?
Right.
And the only thing that's preventing them from making that the headline story is some tiny sense of shame, is my opinion, but we'll get there. By the way, I want to thank you for this Moscato recommendation. I'm not a big dessert wine person, and this is a little sweet for my tastes, but it really is nice here in Texas when it's 100 degrees out. I've got this Bartonura, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong, Italian Moscato, which thanks for the recommendation. It's broadening my horizons. So you're teaching me things not just about website planning, but also about wine, which is really kind of the whole point of this endeavor with Sales for Nerds, at least as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, great.
So I do want to circle back to this pretending to do parkour. So for folks who may not know what parkour is, tell us a little bit about that, and then how do you pretend to do that?
So parkour is basically urban acrobatics. Well, there's technically parkour and free running. And free running, I as I understand it, is more about getting from point A to point B, whereas parkour is about doing the same thing and looking really cool as you get there. So parkour folks will be doing vaulting over railings and flipping off of things and leaping between buildings. You can see this in the Bourne Identity movies. And then I think it's called District B18. It's a French film with some amazing acrobatics. It also has really bad dubbing.
Yes.
Really bad dub actors. So you have the general who's admonishing someone for something he did wrong, and it's just, you have dishonored the military. It's just really bad. So that's an enjoyable part of it as well. So parkour is just, if you ever see kids, running and jumping and flipping, that's parkour. Pretending to do parkour is kind of like parkour light. There's some movements that you can do that are a little more manageable, a little less risky to your body. I don't like the idea of doing flips over cement, but you can still leap and climb and swing and kind of navigate your environment. You can do this. College campuses are a good place. Any kid's play set will usually have some way for you to kind of use it, as it's not intended to be used by adults. And just, it's a lot of fun. It kind of takes away some of the, or gets away from the monotony of the gym.
Okay, and so you kind of get outside and you're doing some combination of gymnastics and aerobics and looking like an action hero all at the same time. Is that it?
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
Now, is this the kind of thing where if you miss something, you end up like upside down, flying at something dangerous face first?
Hopefully not. I like, if you're going to, like, let's say you've got a railing or a bench or something and you want to kind of vault over to leap over it, you can just do the movement really slowly and kind of place your hands and your feet where they want to go. And then once you are confident with a move, then you can do it more quickly.
Okay.
Or, swinging on things, if you're, a reasonable judge of what you can climb and swing on, you can kind of climb around like a monkey and not get hurt because you're aware of your limitations. Like, I know I can stretch my arms this far and go from this bar to that, but if you double that, okay, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to end up on the ground.
And so when you say pretending to do parkour, are you just kind of being modest and saying, I'm going to do parkour within limitations that maybe don't apply to French action movies?
Exactly, yeah. It might look like, acrobatics to some people, but to me, it's just like a good way to move, within reason, and not get hurt. You get to a point in your life, whether it's just age or wisdom or some combination thereof, where you say, like, I could probably do that, but if I do it wrong, like, I don't want to pay the price.
Right.
So I'm going to skip that. Let somebody else do it.
For people who want to see what this is like when you're not pretending, that movie is District B13, and we'll have a link in the show notes. And I believe I have seen that, and there is some incredible action and stunt work in it.
You can also watch I think the first 2 Bourne Identity movies were pretty solid for that. Then the plots got really hackneyed, and the last Bourne movie was just terrible.
Now, tell me a little bit more, because we're talking about this parkour, and you have a very stringent diet. Are you the kind of guy who's like Tim Ferriss, like you're making fun of Tim Ferriss for trying to save too much time, but you're going to optimize your body and be able to do all this cool stuff till you're 80?
Sort of. I have to admit to being kind of a self-improvement addict. It's really like if I have idle time, if I'm eating a meal, I'm probably reading something about, somehow learning something or improving something. But it can be addiction is too strong a word, but it can be something that you can obsess with, and I think it can actually be detrimental. That said, I find it really useful to see what's going on, see what's new, see how I can make my life more enjoyable or better or more efficient, within reason. I'd say I do a modest amount of that stuff, but I'm not, getting up at 5 a.m. or doing anything, or working 16-hour days without a break.
Got it. And
so balance things out.
Do you have any reading recommendations for people?
Oh, in terms of the efficiency, well, I will say I recommend the Tim Ferriss books, not with reservations, but just with the idea that not everybody should want to be or is like Tim Ferriss, or any of the other sort of hyper efficiencies or 10x your learning, 10x this, 10x that. Not everybody should be pursuing that. It's not really suitable for everyone. But I think within those books, there's a lot of really interesting information. Some of it's very contrarian, and I like reading about people approaching things differently or getting success by trying stuff that hasn't been tried before, and also breaking down certain assumptions we have about how the body works or calories in, calories out, or any number of things that we kind of cruise along on autopilot, taking for granted that, this is how it works. If you eat this is going to happen. Well, has anyone ever really tested that?
Right.
And he's one of those people he's even put a little glucose meter on his body to see what his blood sugar is, and is trying to figure out, like, well, what happens if I eat tons of almonds, or what happens if I don't eat, and so on, and kind of reporting the results. He calls himself a human guinea pig. So
right.
I think all of his stuff is definitely worthwhile to look at, just keeping in mind that you don't have to transform yourself into Tim Ferriss when you're done reading it.
And Tim, if you happen to be listening to this, or someone who knows Tim happens to be listening to this, come on the show. Let's discuss all this in more detail, but definitely over wine. I do think there's something funny about Tim sort of being known as the 4-hour workweek guy, and I will bet you my last dollar that guy works a hell of a lot more than 4 hours per week.
Oh, yeah. And he's said that, too. That was kind of a way to, if you want, to kind of optimize your business and your life, but that then it frees up time, I guess, to work on a whole bunch more business and projects.
Right. Well, Ben, I totally appreciate your time here. Now, for folks who are listening to this and saying, gosh, I know my website probably could use some help, and it's stale, and I have a PDF for the menu or whatever other sins that we might have gone into. Are there a few things that they should be looking for that say, gosh, they should really take care of this if this is still a problem in 2017?
Well, quite a few. Yeah, I think I'm just going to pick 3 just to not overload people. The first thing would be responsiveness. For a lot of folks, this is a given. Of course our website's responsive. Well, all that means is that it works across devices. That doesn't mean it has to work on a 10-year-old Palm Pilot or BlackBerry, but it should work on any phone, that's come out within the last couple years, any common tablet, right, and any, of course, what we call the big screen, so laptop or desktop. It doesn't have to look the same. It doesn't even have to work exactly the same, but it should present all the things that you want it to across those devices. If your site is not responsive and you load it in a phone and it looks funny, you'll know pretty quickly.
Yep.
The second thing would be load time. Like, how fast does your site load? A lot of sites are bogged down with images or video or redundant code or other things that just make you sit there tapping your fingers. And there's so many factors along the way from the web server all the way to you at the end with your browser, sitting on the couch watching Netflix or something, that you kind of have to address all those, because ultimately there's some research showing that if you wait too long, like if people have to wait too long, they'll just leave. Like they won't
Right.
tolerate slow load times. And then third, I would just like look at the clutter, look at what's going on. Like, does the site make sense? And have a third party who's not emotionally invested in it kind of poke around it, set up some use cases, basically like what are top 5 things that people are going to try to do when they get here, and then just have someone actually try to do those things and see what kind of friction they encounter. Best case scenario, like they find everything they want, it goes really quickly, and they can go on with their life. And worst case scenario is like, oh, these links are broken, or I can't search on a really common term. And now you have some stuff to fix. And you know that by fixing that, like you're getting at low-hanging fruit and making your site experience better for folks.
And that's a great point, and it's not something that you have to engage even with a web designer for. You can just ask a buddy or a colleague or somebody else, your wife, your spouse, your friend, can you come to my site and tell me what you think?
Yeah, you can get a lot of great feedback in 20 minutes from that exercise.
And I'm guessing that a lot of people have sites that they have gone through a design process and they've had people do that, and they've never actually done that test with sort of a third party, someone that they know, but maybe has never been to their website, but they know well enough that they're going to give them honest feedback.
Yeah, that often gets skipped, especially if a site's a couple years old and people just assume that, since it was built correctly when it was first created, that it's fine now. But things can accumulate, stuff can get messed up. One thing that commonly happens is people take photos right off their digital camera, photos that might be 2 or 3 or 5 meg,
Yes.
and just load them onto the site. Well, now you're just adding a ton of load time to your page with a giant photo that doesn't need to be there. So you scale that photo back, hey, the page loads twice as quickly. Yeah, so there's some quick wins you can get if you just go through and figure that stuff out.
Those are some great points, and you probably know a lot more about this than I do, but my understanding is that Google will penalize you in its listings based on your load time. Is that correct?
I'm not sure technically on that, and Google changes their rules constantly, but they are shifting the rules more and more to, they did this, what do they call it? Was it Mobilegeddon? Terrible name, but I think within the last year or two, they said, hey, if your site's not responsive, we're going to penalize it in the listings. And they will do that from time to time. They're basically trying to enforce best practices on sites. I'm sure it's all for them because they want their search engine, or they want their results to be more relevant so they can make more money.
Right.
But they do kind of push the industry towards like doing things that are good for the end user.
So there you have it, folks. Get some feedback. Make sure it looks good on a phone. Have somebody do a test on a phone and measure how long it takes to load. I'll put a link to a speed test page in the show notes. Ben, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ruben.